Alright guys, in this video I am going to answer a question that I get asked a lot, and that is, what's the difference between the cheap 10-stop ND filters and the expensive ones? You know, is it worth paying the extra money? So I'm going to put to the test here. I've got the Nissi filter holder system and the 10-stop Nissi filter. That retails at roughly about £180. And then I went onto Amazon and I searched for a 10-stop ND filter, and I filtered it by the cheapest. And then this one came up here. It is called a Green L screw-on 10-stop ND filter, and it cost me £15 with free delivery. All right, so what I've got here is £180 setup versus a £15 setup. And basically, I'm going to take the same shot with the expensive 10-stop filter on and the cheap 10-stop ND filter on, and we're going to compare the two and just see, what do you get with that extra money? You know, is it worth it? Well, let's find out. So we have come to this beautiful Tudor church near to where we are based in Essex, and basically the shot that I'm going to take is the church with the clouds streaking behind it, all right, or in the sky. And that type of shot you can only get with 10-stop or 6-stop or 15-stop ND filters, but generally it's a 10-stop ND filter, all right? So we're going to go for that classic cloud streaking in the sky shot. Let's set up the camera and let's take this shot. Right, I'm all set up for the shot now, and I've done an exposure test. It looks like about 60 seconds is a good time to get the clouds streaking in the sky. Okay, so I've done an exposure test. Now if you want to learn all about long exposure photography and using ND filters and things like that, you know, we teach you in depth how to do that. I will put a link in the description of this video. You can go and see that. But this video is not about learning how to take long exposures, it's about the test between cheap and expensive. All right, so I'm going to just take a shot now, 60-second shot of this church, and I'm going to do exactly the same thing with the cheaper filter. So I've got the expensive one on first, and let's just take the shot, shall we? Okay, so that's the first shot, and all I've done there is overlay the pure raw file, so you can see the pure raw file. We are going to go into the studio and have a real good look at these pictures in a minute, but for now that is just the raw file. Okay, now I'm going to swap the expensive filter, put the cheap one on, and take exactly the same shot. So let's do that. Okay, so that's the shot now taken with the cheaper filter, and again that is just the raw file straight out of camera. Now the first thing that I did notice there was it was brighter. All right, now the scene hasn't changed much, so the only thing that you can assume there is that the cheaper filter is not fully 10 stops like it states. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to take a few more shots with each different filter there, just so that we've got, you know, a good comparison, and then we're going to go and look at them in depth on the computer screen, and I'm going to also process them as well so we can see the difference when they're processed. Okay, so I'm going to do that and I'll see you back in the studio. Right, so we are back in the studio, obviously, and I've had a good look in depth at the results here, and very, very interesting, I can tell you. Now, before we look at them, I want to take this opportunity to tell you about the courses that we run over at theschoolofphotography.com. If you want to learn photography properly, if you want to learn long exposure photography like what we was doing outside, if you want to learn Photoshop, Lightroom, or anything photography related, we teach you via our online courses over at theschoolofphotography.com. We are professional teachers. We've been teaching since 2002, and I can promise you that I will teach you photography properly like I do for thousands and thousands of people all over the world. So come and check us out at theschoolofphotography.com if you want to learn photography properly. Let's now go and look at the results. So here we have the Nissi example. So, you know, just to remind you, it was a 60-second exposure outside. This is the Nissi example, raw file straight out of camera. As you can see, there is no processing been done on this shot. Right now, let's just now go to the equivalent of the cheap filter. And actually, if you look up here, this is the name of the file, and I've put -Nissi or -cheap, okay? So this one is the Nissi. If I go to here and click on this one, it says -cheap. So, you know, that will give you an indication of the pictures that we are looking at. But this is the equivalent, all right? 60-second exposure, as you can see up the top here, 60-second exposure with a 10 stop on, and then here is a 60-second exposure with a 10 stop on with the Nissi filter raw file, right? You can see quite clearly that the Nissi filter has done it properly, whereas the cheap filter here has not. Now, I did a few tests while I was outside. I wanted to make sure that the lighting was the same, you know, that the sun didn't go in and out and things like that, because obviously that affects exposure time. But I did a few tests, and I can tell you now that that cheap filter is not a 10-stop ND filter. It's about an 8-stop filter, 1.5 to 2 stops out. Now, that causes problems, obviously, with your exposure times when you're working it out. So you've got your exposure calculator, and I have got, don't forget, a free one for you. I've got a free exposure calculator, link in the description of this video. You can download it, take it with you. But if you're using an exposure calculator, it's not going to work for this particular filter. It's an 8-stop filter, so, you know, there's one thing to consider. So what I did was I took the same shot again, and this time at 30 seconds, and there you go. So that one there at 30 seconds is probably the equivalent of this one here, which is the Nissi one, at 60 seconds, all right? And even so, like I said to you, it's still a tiny little bit brighter, I think. And, you know, like I said, it's about 1.5 to 2 stops out. And, you know, I did a few different tests just to make sure. So that is gonna prove problematic for you, unless you say to yourself, okay, I've bought it as a 10-stop filter, but I'm just going to measure for 8 stops. You're going to use an 8-stop calculator rather than a 10-stop calculator, then it would probably work, all right? But there's your first thing to consider. When you actually process the shots, so now I've processed the shot, that's this one here. So here's the Nissi filter process shot, okay? And then over here is the cheap filter process shot. But this one has been taken at 30 seconds, like I said. You can see how problematic it's getting, all right? So this is the processed cheap filter, and this is the processed expensive filter. Not really much difference at all. Once you process the shot, it actually looks all right on the cheap one and on the expensive one. Let's just zoom in just to prove that fact. Let's just zoom in on some of the brickwork here. So this again is the expensive filter, and then let's go over to the cheap filter here and move over to roughly the same place, which is here. And there we go. So let's go back to the expensive filter. There it is. And the cheap filter. There it is. All right. So there you go. You know, once you process the shot, it's really not going to make much difference. So the cheap one, if you're going to process it and you're going to deal with the fact that it's not an actual 10-stop filter, you know, it does the job. I did find that it had more of a green cast. Let's go back to the raw file again. So I'm going to zoom out on this one here and go back to the raw file. You can see that it's got a slight green cast if you look in the clouds and that. So let's zoom in a little bit. That is not problematic, and I hear on some of these reviews and people, you know, they go mad because it gives you a slight color cast. It is not problematic because you change it when you come back into Lightroom anyway. And in fact, if we go back to the raw file with the Nissi one and zoom into the clouds, This one has got a slight magenta cast, but again, it's only very slight. And them things are, well, they're not problematic at all. Like I said, you can process them afterwards, all right? I want to show you one more thing. Let me just zoom out here. I'm going to go to the black and white version here. So here's a black and white version with the expensive Nissi filter. And here's a black and white version with the cheap filter. As you can see, no one will tell the difference. No one will tell the difference that that one's a cheap one and this one is an expensive one. So there is the visual results of a cheap £15 filter. So don't forget, this was only £15 with free postage, all right? So that's £15 in total was that filter there. And it was obviously up against this one here with the filter holder system, £180. I mean, there is a massive difference there, and that is the visual difference between the two. Here is my verdict. If you are just playing around, all right, if you just want to have a little play around with this technique, there's nothing wrong with the cheap one, the £15 one. It will do the job. Yes, you are going to have problems working out the exposure time. All right, it's going to give you a green cast, but you can take that out in post-processing. So if it's just for playing around, you know, you will get some decent results, as you can see here. Now, if you are going to take this type of photography in any way seriously, like if you're a serious enthusiast or a pro, whatever, you've got to go for the expensive one. And the reason for that is you've got your exposure times have got to be right, for Christ's sake. If you're using an exposure calculator and you're out taking a shot, you want to get that exposure correct. Long exposure photography is hard enough as it is. So you're having a 10-stop ND filter that is actually an accurate 10-stop is clearly very important. You do also notice the quality in the glass, all right? So the cheaper one, as you would expect, as a matter of fact, the cheaper one is a thinner type of glass, and you could expect that it's going to be easier to break. So having the expensive one obviously is going to give you a bit more confidence, whacking things in and out of your bag and, you know, traveling abroad and whatever else. So there is that durability aspect to consider as well. And of course, the other thing is these cheaper ones that you buy, you know, off the internet, they're screw on. They just screw on the front of your lens, as I showed you while we was outside. Whereas the more expensive ones, they use, well, this here, the filter holder system. Now, the beauty of the filter holder system is you can mix your 10-stop ND filter with other filters like a grad filter. And when you get into landscape photography and long exposure photography, you will 100% be mixing filters together. The other good thing with a filter holder system is that you can get adapter rings for the holder system and you can use the same filter on different lenses. So, you know, you have got to consider that if you are buying a cheap or expensive system. If you want to start mixing filters together, if you want to start using 10-stop ND filters on different lenses, then you're going to need the filter holder system. So if you're playing around, cheap one, absolutely fine. If you're thinking in any way, shape or form to take this type of photography forward and be a bit more serious with it, and you know, it's something that you're going to be doing for years and years and years, then definitely invest in a filter holder system and a more expensive kit. You know, that's my opinion anyway. And I am actually going to put links in the description of this video to these products so you can go and have a look at them more in depth. Now, if you are doing long exposure photography, we've got a great online community of people sharing their work. All you need to do is hashtag the School of Photography on social media and people will see them. We will see them here and of course other people will see them. So all you need to do is go to our Facebook or Instagram page, search for the hashtag the School of Photography and, you know, see other people's work and of course tag your own work so we can see it and other people can see it. And of course we love to see your work, so please do that. Now, the next thing that I would love people to do is put their experiences in the comments of this video. You know, you may well have experience with expensive and cheap filters, and you can share that with our audience. I would love to hear it, and our audience would love to hear it. So please let us know. Like the video, help us out. Please help us out. Like the video, subscribe to our channel, and share this video with your friends. I hope to see you in the next video, and remember, learn more at the School of Photography.